Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. Today we're reviewing a biography of an author I love dearly, Steig Larsson. This is by Jan-Erik Pettersson. Byline is The Real Story of the Man Who Played with Fire. So this is it seems like all friends contributing and people who really knew him that look at him not as author of the Millennium series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, as it's kind of better known. So he really was a journalist, first and foremost, and an activist, and so the book is really broken into three parts. So first, kind of his activist life, younger years, and then getting into more formalized journalism work with his magazine Expo, and then the second or the third section, which would be more about his crime novels, which he's obviously known most well for. But it's really just a fascinating tale into a man who was so brave. And that's something where I think in this era we think of journalism, it's like it's the same, it's content mills, it's people that are just, griping about politics, it's polarized, it's stoking fires, where he really was digging into far right extremism is basically where he was targeting. So in Sweden, post-World War II, there was still a lot of traces of Nazism, and he was very much of the heart of, that can never happen again. We have to stamp that out. When you see it, shine a light. And so in his earlier days, kind of coming at it both from, anti-racism and feminism, and that's kind of the two-prong approach. And he really, along with his staff at Expo and all the people around him, just relentlessly dove into work that would terrify other journalists. I mean, if you went to neo-Nazi websites in those days, they would have people that they're seeking, their sort of most wanted list. Stieg was continually on them. It's one of the reasons that he was never married to Eva Gabrielson, his lifelong partner, because in Sweden the public has access to all of this information, both your passport, all this stuff. You can get copies of everything, marriage license, you can go in there and just learn all this stuff. And so he didn't want anyone to be able to trace the love of his life. But at the same time, you can see who's sort of checking up on you. So he could see how many people are going in there and requesting copies of his passport and who they are and how fucking scary those people are. And he did not shy away from it. He got very used to having to look over his shoulder or know where the back exits were in places. And not to divulge too much into the subject, I feel like I do that a lot here instead of talking about the book itself. But I really like the way that it's broken down, and essentially a reframing of the man who is sort of eclipsed by these bestsellers, where his life's work was not those books. And it's fascinating to me because you read those books and you're just like, wow, these are masterpieces. These would be all-encompassing for an author, but he basically did them at night. He would continue doing his journalism work, and that was his fun outlet, where he was quoted in saying it's so much easier to write novels because you're not sitting there having to be right 100% of the time. You're just writing to move the characters forward, and then the characters really took on a life of their own. And he told people they're doing things I never thought they could do, instead where they really just were their own beings. And so I think he really became enthralled with them, and that's why he was able to not only make them so long, but so full and so deep. And he tragically had outlines for 10 books. That's always a rumor I had heard, and then sure enough, in here, that was the goal. That was pretty common in Swedish crime novels. And so a lot of the third section, before it gets into him just writing these books, because it kind of touched on it throughout the other sections, especially the second one being later in his life, it really kind of gave a lay of the land for crime novels in Sweden, and how they bubbled up, they'd almost kind of gone out of vogue, people would bring them back, female writers kind of bringing it back up, and then he just comes in with these heavyweights of novels. And I really loved them right from the jump, but reading Eva Gabrielson's book really shined a light on it. So if you want it handy right here. So her book, There Are Things I Want You to Know About Stieg Larsson and Me, was really fascinating. So she was his lifelong partner, like I said, not married. That created a lot of complications when he had his untimely death, which was before any of the books were published. He had published many other nonfiction books, but yeah, it's so sad to think about like that. I mean, just any time, a life is cut short. He was so young, so on the cusp of such greatness. And not to say, I mean, he was already a prolific journalist and regarded very highly, but like, yeah, he didn't live to see it. And I think the thing that makes me saddest is not so much that like, oh, I wanted more books. It's that like he did these and knowing that they would be successful. Like he was not an overtly like confident, brash man. But when he talked about the crime novels, even before he wrote them, he's like, I'm going to write some crime novels that'll make millions. Like, and that's how we're going to fund the magazine. Like, Expo had always been on kind of thin ice. And so he was like, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to pull down some big checks and put it right back into the magazine. We're going to keep this thing going because we're exposing people. We're a thorn in the side of Nazism, and a severe one. So he would, I mean, as well with other people, like once he was kind of known, like infiltrate these groups, get in there and just expose them. And it was the worst thing for them. It's just, they wanted to be secret, and he did the opposite to them. So he could have done so much more, and his voice was about to get so much louder. And I politically really aligned with him. So like to know, like, I mean, he could have moved the ball forward so much more with the power that he had. And there's traces of that sentiment in the books, but I mean, for him to, like, he did lectures, he spoke so much, like he was just a powerhouse. And it's a sad read. I mean, obviously you know how it's going to end, but it's fascinating to learn about someone's working life in that way. I think people almost sometimes have two lives, and I think he almost just had one, where I, like, people at work know me one way, that it's a little bit different. It's kind of fractured in this way where he was just through and through living this work, would sleep at the office, would be in there, they'd come in the morning, he's asleep, slumped over his chair, the man wrote and researched, and because of that became this archive of extremists and new political leanings, was calling shots, like, so, saying that the Swedish Democrats are going to be a problem, and everyone's like, oh, they've only gotten like 1 or 2% of the vote. Years later, big problem. And he was just a political genius. And I think if you're like me, you've read those Girl with the Dragon Tattoo books and you crave more, this is an extremely satisfying read. I have not read the new ones, the ones that are not written by him, mostly because of what I learned in this book. I just don't really jive with that. If you have read them, let me know. What do you think of them? Like, I try to end each video with a pretty substantial question. Drop in the comments. What do you think of books 4, 5? I think there's even 6 now. Haven't seen the movies, haven't dug in. I'm just out of like allegiance to Stieg. But yeah, he remains one of my favorite writers ever. And there's more biographies. I'll probably read them just to keep understanding this wonderful man more and more. So thank you for watching. Today's Christmas Eve. Hope you're having a nice wintry day.